Good afternoon. This is Michael Reinowesser. I'm the president of the BTI Consulting Group, and I'd like to personally welcome you this afternoon to our webinar. I realize for some of you, I should say good morning and some good evening. We do have individuals from all over the world. We're expecting about 1,200 or a little more people today. By the time this is all registered, we still got people logging on and coming in. So we're pretty excited about the day and about today's webinar. Before we get too far into it, what I'd like to do is express my deep personal appreciation to Joy Harnois. Many of you have talked to Joy and know that she's kind of the person that sits in the middle of our operations and makes sure that everything gets done. And this would not have happened without Joy and my partner, Jennifer Dizo, who will be joining me later on in the webinar, who worked diligently with me to help put this together today. What we wanted to do from our offices just outside of Boston, where it must be a sign because the sun is starting to come out after a cloudy morning. It's about 65 degrees. And we wanted to talk about the changes in the market, and we wanted to talk about the opportunities that are being presented by this. If you're looking at your screen, what you'll see is a chart. This chart is put out by the Economic Policy Institute, and they publish monthly an index which is relied on throughout the world. This, what you're looking at, is the U.S. version. And the U.S. version, of course, is the United States economy. And they also have a global version and versions for different parts of the world. Today, I wanted to focus on the U.S. and a U.S.-centric presentation and analysis. What I think is important as you're looking at this is to look at the history and to look at the extremes that are kind of going on over time. If we start out, what I'd like to point out is here's 2010 right about here, which will remind everybody where the financial crisis was, and the aftermath of the financial crisis would be right about here. So you had peak uncertainty. Organizations couldn't get credit. They didn't know which way the markets were going. They didn't know how to freeze or unfreeze their accounts. There was just a lot of chaos and a lot of uncertainty. You'll see if we look at basically where we are today, we are at that same level. And this is really kind of extraordinary considering we're in very different circumstances. By and large, the stock market has been strong except for some rather, unnerving volatility, but nothing like we saw in 2010. The economy, most people think, is kind of good with some question marks. And it's those kinds of comments with the question marks and the regulatory uncertainty and the tariff uncertainty and trade uncertainty and or different interpretation of regulations that are going on. All this comes together to bring us in the mind of clients where we were right in the peak or right after the financial crisis. The only other time we've actually even come close is for those of you that might remember the Argentinian financial crisis, where they actually had to freeze the banks and close the banks because there was a bank run and they were concerned about global contagion, about who would bail the banks out and what impacts it would have if Argentine banks failed. So this is a extraordinary event in history, and it also at the same time is a bit of an extraordinary event for law firms in terms of the opportunities that are in front of us. The reason it's such an opportunity is because clients, when faced with uncertainty, are always looking for certainty. By definition, that's what they're trying to do, that's what they're trying to add, and they're trying to plan their strategies around this idea of certainty. So any law firm that can come in and add a framework, this framework can be just to analyze the uncertainty, share the benefit of your experience, especially your very seasoned individuals or the individuals in your firm that have a lot of insight into kind of dealing with uncertainty, prioritizing the risks, being that kind of objective, informed third party that can also be the voice of calm and reason. and help clients assess the nature and extent of these kinds of uncertainty and this risk. The interesting part of this, of course, is this is the absolute best way to develop business. If you're in there and your partners are in there and they're talking to clients about the uncertainty and what it means to them, how they're dealing with it, how other clients deal with it, you're not going to hear about, objections you have to overcome. You're not going to hear the questions about, your rates are too high. What you're going to hear is a client that wants to learn more and sees the clear and obvious value that you can bring. You won't have competition. The great thing about this opportunity is when you have this kind of uncertainty, it typically requires a team to deal with this, and we're going to talk about this today. So it's an opportunity not just for an individual attorney to bill hours, but there's an opportunity to really go in and develop a team to solve clients' problems. It's a solutions-oriented approach. So if you have a time when you have clients with such a high level of need for answers, and they're not getting the answers that A, they're not getting them at all, or B, they're not getting helpful answers, that's the opportunity to step in. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is how all this is impacting clients' thinking about law firms, about themselves, and what you as a law firm can do about it. So first, complexity and uncertainty, as we just talked about, are at the highest levels since the financial crisis. And it's really having an impact, a current impact, on how clients are spending their money. This is the analysis we shared with you back in our December webinar, our January webinar, where we projected what spending would be, and we projected that you'd see about $7.3 billion in new high-risk matters come into the market in 2019. Now, one of the things that's changed based on our research in the marketplace since then is it looked like that number has gone from 7.3 to 8.1. So that's $800 million that is coming into the marketplace, representing new, complex, high-risk matters, the kind of matters that clients know they're going to pay premium rates. It's the kind of matters that they know can get out of hand. This is where the risk and the uncertainty in the world is finding its way into clients, because it's impacting the kinds of issues, the kind of matters, the kind of regulatory issues that they're facing. So they have to allocate more and more money to be able to fund this new work. Now, one of the things that's really important, this may have gone up by $800 million, but this total spending still by and large isn't going to go up that much. So what's going to happen is you're going to see a shift in spending with more money going to the upper end of the work, and then every other practice is really going to have to, figure out how to deal with less money being available for those needs, because those needs aren't going away either. Now, as we track the dollars, they're not only moving, but they're moving quickly. So as you're talking to clients about matters, what you might find is even in the course of a couple of weeks, the rate pressure, the rate sensitivity in a particular area may change, may go down, may go up if it's a complex matter or adds a level of complexity, but there's a little more dynamic nature to the near-term impact on rates. And when we go back to the January webinar where we talked about where the practices were going to be, this is what we saw. This is what the marketplace was telling us that it was going to head. There were numerous practices that really were going to be up in that right-hand quadrant, getting higher rates, getting premium rates, and they were growing. And that was the real opportunity. Now, if you look at it, the opportunities are a little bit more specific. We're seeing that $800 million going to basically 4 places. We're going to start with cybersecurity. One of the really interesting things about cybersecurity has been this original analysis that we did in January came just before the Marriott breach. And now, of course, the Marriott breach is well known. It's a state-sponsored breach, and it is having a big impact on clients who are scratching their heads and saying, now do I have to, is the standard that I'm going to be held to, that I have to be prepared to protect our company from state-sponsored data breaches and cybersecurity? This is still an open question, but they're quite worried about it. This is also, impacted by GDPR and the new regulations in California. Those three alone, not to mention the fallout from the intense scrutiny that the data-driven tech companies are under, the Facebooks, the Googles, to Apple, they're all, is bringing attention to cybersecurity in the corporate world. So we see more spending. Clients perceive there's much more risk today than there was just in the 5 or 6 months ago when we were talking about this. If we move over and look at bet the company work, you're seeing, fees and rates heading up just like cybersecurity, and you're also seeing that, it's growing as well. Part of this is the fact that companies are changing their definition of bet the company. They're becoming more conservative, and it used to be that bet the company is a matter that affected the stock price, it affected critical operations, or it affected a brand. Now what you can add in there that it affects the balance sheet, and it affects the balance sheet in a material way, because that of course has to be disclosed. It has huge impact on the stock price. So the threshold for what's bet the company, companies are getting a little bit more trigger, happy, and they're willing to view more things as bet the company litigation, which means higher rates, of course, different hiring criteria. Investigations would be the other area I'd like to highlight. It seems that in the last 6 months, companies are hearing more about the various jurisdictional agencies, whether it be state, federal, are conducting or want to conduct or inquiring, implying that there might be investigations. It seems to be, I don't want to say it's an epidemic yet, but it is quite widespread. We've heard more companies in the last 6 months talk about investigations than we have probably in the last 10 years. So this is something that is moving up, and most of the investigations involve, multi-practice approaches. They involve different and multiple offices that have to work together. And as you can see, the rates are going up pretty dramatically, as is the growth on investigations. Litigation is another area where we're seeing rates go up, and we're seeing a little bit more growth than expected, because the litigation is a lot thornier than it's been. It's more aggressive. I think Quinn Emanuel going after Amazon in a class action typifies the aggressive nature of how litigation is headed and what companies are trying to prepare themselves for. They're also seeing multiple litigations, which we've seen now for probably 2 to 3 years, where litigation of a certain nature will attract a class action suit, will attract securities fraud, and other also attract regulatory agencies. So it's getting more expensive, it's getting more complex, I have to deal with more issues, and the net of it all is, as a company, not only do I have complexity, but I have a much larger financial exposure than I've had in the past. So this is driving that increase in litigation. Now, what's happening, of course, is as we talk about this, these fees are headed up. Everything else on here is going to bear the brunt of the rate pressure. So it's going to be a challenge to try to protect your rates. So this is going to require real negotiating skills, and that's why we're starting to see a bit of a resurgence, and we're going to be talking about this on the blog in a couple of months. AFAs are on the rise as well. This is how law firms are starting to deal with some of these other areas. So the impact is widespread. It's driving AFAs again, but to come back to the main theme is there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of rate opportunity in these 4 practices, and clients, again, are being very picky about who they want to give this to, and they're using different criteria, but those law firms that could position themselves to get it are doing very, very well in this marketplace. Now, one of the big changes, and this is a real big change, is clients want and are picking bigger, stronger, scalable teams. You know, the age of we're lean and mean, the age of we're smaller and just as effective, the age of we're as good as them but cheaper, you know, that's for the low end of the market right now. For the high risk work that we're talking about, clients are picking the bigger teams. You know, it was interesting because we were working with a longtime client of ours doing some client feedback, and you know, our client was wondering why they weren't getting more work from what was already a very good client, but a known very large spender. We did some client feedback. We designed some new questions. We designed some new probes and put it all together in different ways. And what we learned is basically this client said is that the law firm with whom we were working was proposing teams that weren't big enough for what they felt is the uncertainty and the risk that they were now facing in M&A. So learning that, the firm met with the client to discuss staffing strategies and the best way to do things. And to make a long story short, about 5 months later, went from billing approximately, you know, $380,000 a month to over $900,000 a month. Because they were proposing bigger teams, because they were proposing a novel idea of reserve attorneys who would be kept informed, but they could reach beyond the team. And all of a sudden, a big team was outperforming in terms of fee revenue the smaller, quote, lean and mean team. And what the client said is, it's much more important to us that this deal, these deals that they're working on get done on time, and anything that comes up, because all kinds of crazy things were coming up, that you have the capacity to deal with those things so we don't miss our deadlines. And that, we're hearing that in litigation, we're hearing that in M&A, we're hearing that in cybersecurity especially, and we're hearing it in the company, those areas that are growing. So this idea of how do we rethink what we're saying to clients, what messages are we sending to clients about the teams that we're proposing? Are we, you know, comfortable going in and saying, because many of the attorneys we talk to still say, you know, I want to go in, small team, we got to be cheap. But what clients are thinking is, yeah, cheap is good for certain work, but not for this work. So how do we represent ourselves? How do we tell that story? That's one of the big challenges for law firms right now. Now, one of the other big changes is recommendations have become somewhat scarce. And this is why one of the main reasons that organic growth is harder to come by, because recommendations are a large source of inbound referrals. 60% of clients rely on a referral from a peer to hire a new law firm, and will hire that law firm based on just one unprompted recommendations. But if there's fewer of those going around, well, then there's less inbound work to the firms that would have gotten those recommendations in years past. And it also means more RFPs. And I know how much everybody on this call loves RFPs. So that should be exciting, but we are seeing more RFPs, especially in the larger companies. And our research is also telling us that CMOs are, by and large, seeing more RFPs. So it's making it more difficult to grow. It's making it harder to acquire business. And it's having a whole range of impacts that we're going to continue to talk about. Specifically, only 36% of law firms are earning peer-to-peer recommendations, that is general counsel to general counsel, top legal decision maker to top legal decision maker. That means that 2/3 are not. So that 36% that's earning them have a clear organic access an advantage in the marketplace. Because if you're getting referrals, which of course are based on client service, then you're getting access to this great work. Okay, clients have a high expectation when you walk in the door. We all know that if you're going after work through an RFP, your chances of winning, if the first time you see an RFP is when it lands on your desk, your chances are 1 in 12. If you have seen the RFP, maybe even helped shape it, your chances are about 1 in 3 and 4. Not nearly as good as, of course, getting that inbound referral. Now, just for perspective, last year, 12 months ago, this number, 36%, was 42%. So this number is going down, and the reasons, are clients aren't necessarily seeing the kinds of interest in uncertainty that they really want, and that is the kind that makes them stick their neck out to rely on a particular firm. So it may not be surprising that 78% of the last hires that clients made in the last 12 months are new providers because they're auditioning firms. They're not getting what they want. They're not seeing the scalable, stronger teams as often as they want. They're not hearing law firms who behave as though they're not comfortable talking about risk and taking on uncertainty. So they're doing what any rational consumer would do, which is to go out and find what it is they need. So if you think about that and try to make it something else that could be a little bit more understandable, what I'm going to do is share with you how clients rate their law firm in terms of their ability to deal with complexity. Now, 10 being the best, 1 being completely unacceptable, but really the unacceptable line comes in right here. Anything below a 7 is just something clients won't tolerate. 8 is fair. It's a good solid. 8.3 is a good solid B-, and I know that most attorneys go to school and say, I'm going to work my rear end off so I can get a B-, and we all know that clients say, I got a super big problem here, so go get me a B-level firm. It's really, kind of interesting in that the gap between the average, which is 8.3, and the median, which is 9.0, means that there's roughly 50% of law firms out there that are doing this pretty well. And then you got a whole another half of law firms that are just not doing it well at all. So you've got this dynamic where, basically if you're down here, you're going to have a real hard time getting access to that work. If you're below here, you're going to have difficult getting access to clients. But if you're up here, then that's the place where clients see you talking about the uncertainty. They see the level of comfort that you have. They see that you're answering questions clearly. They see that you're bringing an understanding of the business risk as well as the legal risk. They see that you have been able to focus and cut through the complexity and put all the pieces together. The list goes on, but firms, clients tell us that they can spend just a few minutes with a firm and they almost know immediately whether or not a firm has brought their B game, their C game, or their A game. And, unfortunately, these clients won't really say to you, well, you don't understand complexity, so we're not going to give you the work. What they're going to say is, the rates are too high. So sorry. Decision's out of my hands. So sorry. And, it would be more helpful to firms to know that clients don't think they can deal with complexity, but that's not the nature of the relationship. Now, we thought it would be interesting to share with you the law firms who are best at dealing with complexity as recognized by clients. So I'm going to start by showing you the best of the best and the leaders of the best. And congratulations to, Gibson, Dunn, Skadden, Jones Day, and Wachtell for standing out and dealing with complexity. Same to the firms that are leaders who are, this is basically, the top 15, top 20 in terms of dealing with complexity. And this is really a difficult honor to gain from very demanding clients. But I want to go further than this. I want you to look at the honor roll. I'm not going to go through every firm, and I have a couple more pages, but this is important just to scan, because as you look at it, you're going to see international firms, you're going to see regional firms, you're going to see single office firms, you're going to see every kind of firm that there is. Magic Circle firm, they're all there. But they're in the same place as the smaller firms, some with less than 100 attorneys. There's one on there with less than 50 attorneys. But they have such a lock on the understanding of their client's risk that in fact, they may even go out and get co-counsel if they don't have the resources to do it, but these firms are going to take the lead. And that's the real point, is we haven't yet reached the point where it's the giant firms who have all the skills. There are many firms that are able to deal with complexity. So the competition is everywhere, but no firm is structurally ruled out. Clients are open, and we know firms, very large clients, that have hired smaller firms to help them with very complex issues because they were so comfortable in understanding and dealing and being able to just cut through the complexity in a way that was so helpful to them. This is the second page. You can just take a look. You see the same pattern here. Large global firms, regional firms, and everything in between. And then finally, this is the last page. And you see the same thing again. So this just makes a point. All of these, of course, came out of the BTI Client Service A team that we released at the end of last year. But the point is that every firm that is on this call can go out and figure out how to get this business. Nobody is precluded. The only thing that precludes you is the inability to talk about complexity. What do these firms do that nobody else does, that what makes them stand out? Well, the first thing they do is listen. And one of the things that I've learned in my 30 years of doing this is listening is a skill. Some people can sit and hear other people talk, but they don't listen. Listen means absorbing. Listening means integrating what you've heard. Listening means thinking about what you've heard. In the case of a client, listening means acting on what you've heard in a way that helps the clients. Now, since we're dealing with complexity, we're not talking about average listening skills here. We're talking about deep, penetrating, going to the heart of the matter. And this requires even more skill. It requires different kinds of questions that even many in client feedback don't ask. This requires the kind of listening skills to pick up on the code words that say, this may be a problem, but I'm not sure. Or in many cases, this may be one of the top 3 challenges in the complex work world. Clients don't know exactly how to articulate the risk. They don't know how to articulate the service that is going to mitigate that risk, but they have a general description of what's going on. So these listening skills require that you kind of put together the disparate pieces of all the things your client's telling you. And many people who have this skill tell me that they have the aha moment. This is the epiphany moment where you put it all together and you go, I got it. I see what's wrong. I see the path. And that kind of listening is what gets you this kind of work and probably an extraordinarily strong client relationship. So let's talk about how you can prove that you can and will scale. And it's interesting because we divided it into 3 categories because we hear 3 different things from clients. You got the largest firms, you got the mid-sized firms, and you got the smaller firms. Now, the larger firms The challenge is the partners have to demonstrate they can collaborate before a matter arises. So you show them an overkill staff, but convince clients that you're ready to scale up when you need them with a reserve staff. They don't necessarily want the overkill staff to start on day one, but they do want the bigger staff, and they want it to be able to scale, and they want to talk to you about how and when to deploy the reserves with, they want you and the client want to work together. That's what they want, to know when those reserves need to kick in. The client doesn't necessarily want a formal approval, but they want to have an idea of the events that might occur to bring in. I think a great example of this is there was an article in Law 360 who was kind enough to include the BTI perspective, where a number of firms are using appellate lawyers at the very beginning, from the very beginning in a litigation case, so that if it should go long, if it should get large, if it should get ugly, if it should go against them, they are that much more prepared. They also send a message to the other side of what kind of commitment they're willing to make. Those are the kinds of larger staffs, reserve staffs that some of the larger firms are using, actually some of the mid-sized firms as well, but these are the discussions that clients want to have. Also, we want to make sure that clients understand that you can collaborate, because roughly 50% of clients, I think it's 49 to be exact, don't believe their large firm partners collaborate. They'll describe the large firm as, partners who have different practices, but half of them don't believe that they actually collaborate and operate as teams. So that's another challenge as a large firm you're going to have to overcome. Now, as a mid-sized firm, they pretty much believe you have teams. They're not sure, but they're inclined to believe that you do. You don't have that big 50% that say you don't work in teams, but they still want you to show up and they want you to take the lead, because their big concern with a mid-sized firm is that you won't take the lead. So you want to set up that kind of environment where you have the team, you prove you have the team, and then you start by discussing the ideal staffing mix and how you're going to approach this with the client, and always behave as a team so that your client knows this is the way you view the world. Now, smaller firms, interestingly enough, even large clients believe small firms are going to be teams because they're small enough to know each other. But what they want to know is what's the role and the value of each team member. And again, like the mid-sized firms, always behave as a team. So that's the first thing, is proving you can scale and will scale. If you can't get through this hurdle, this is where a lot of law firms end up dropping out of the system. Then tackle certainty head on. If you're a large firm, clients expect you to walk in ready to proactively talk about the points of uncertainty. They expect you to walk in, know about uncertainty, talk about how to manage it, and have recommendations in hand. What they hear from the large firms is, we're the largest firms in the world, we have all these resources, and their response is, what does that mean for me? Does that mean that you're going to go fly around the world and find all the people that can help me, or do you already have them together? Do you already have a knowledge base of these people? If you have the knowledge base, you'll have the recommendations in hand, and that's why clients want to see them. If you're a mid-sized firm, clients, they're fine with mutuality, is sitting down and learning and talking about the risks, talking about how to identify them, plan for them, developing an action plan, managing the points of uncertainty, but doing it on a regular basis. If you show up once and talk about it, you might not want to go at all. That may do more damage than not showing up. But talking about it with your client every quarter, because we're in an environment where the risk changes quarterly. So what's changed? And if nothing's changed, clients would much rather have you say, or have them say nothing's changed, than have something change that nobody knows about. In the smaller firms, the real criteria, it's interesting, is they want to make sure you understand the business risk, you understand the fundamentals of what's going to impact their business. They believe that you can handle the problem and throw yourself into it, but their big question is that, how are you going to understand what it means for our business? Because you may understand complexity, but if you don't understand complexity to the point where you understand what it means for a business, then that's not helpful to us because you're missing half the risk. So to me, what was interesting as I looked at it, then, what I found is that, each group of firms, as we just talked about, has the ability to go in and deliver on this work. But at the same time, clients have different criteria and expectations for these three types of firms. So being able to position yourself to deal with it, and again, just making sure we all understand, when you go into places like cybersecurity, when you go into specialized industries, smaller firms have a real advantage because they are perceived as being nimble, they are perceived as having an understanding, they're being perceived as accessible. And that's one of the reasons they show up on these lists. So each firm brings their own set of advantages, and how are you going to bring that advantage forward as you're pitching, hopefully, your existing clients, because I'd want to go out and talk to my existing clients about this as soon as the webinar's over. We'll wait till the webinar's over, please. And I'd want to also start my pitches, start building this in. How do we just put this front and center? Way before when your law firm was started, way before we learn how many attorneys you have, way before we learn how many litigations you've taken to trial and how many deals you've done. This is what clients want to know, and I would have this on page 1, probably ahead of the name of my firm. Now, we're talking about threes, and that kind of led me to the 3 questions that clients, our clients, we're telling our clients that if you really want to win the work, you have to go look in the mirror, take a very hard look, and can you answer these questions in the affirmative? These sit at the core. And one of the challenges is that if you go up to, most attorneys and say, is the answer to this question affirmative? They'll say, of course, absolutely, positively. But when you start doing the client feedback, like the firm where the feedback said, we love the firm, but they're just not proposing the right teams. They're not understanding the scale that we want. They're not understanding that, the nature of how problems might get out of hand. And, as good as this firm was, they just got better. We saw the same thing with a firm that was dealing with a regulatory issue which could have become an investigation, and through client feedback, what they learned is this was just one leg of what appeared to be a multi-jurisdictional, multi-agency investigation. And based on that feedback, came back and proposed a team that was, roughly 14 people deep, because that's what that client needed. Changed the way the client completely thought about the law firm, and of course, the law firm got a large lucrative assignment out of it. So the ability to find the evidence to say we can answer these questions in the affirmative and answer them better sits at the key of being able to get more work.
I'm going to jump in for just a minute, and hello, everybody. This is Jennifer Dizo with BTI. I just want to remind everybody that's on the webinar today, from signing up for the webinar, you're going to get access to complimentary tools that BTI is going to share with everyone. And those particular tools are going to help you have these types of conversations with your clients. And I think what Michael just said is really important to keep in mind, because no matter how many internal meetings your attorneys at the firm have, and no matter how well we think we know our clients, the only way that you can actually answer these questions with 100% certainty is to proactively sit down with clients and talk to them about these topics. And it really is especially true at a time when client thinking and client expectations are shifting fairly dramatically from where they've been, which is what we've been talking about.
Thank you, Jen. And I think we can't emphasize that point enough. And, it's interesting because we're just happened to be a good tee-up for, the third implication is getting direct client feedback about 2 things. One is, how are clients thinking about their own risk and uncertainty. How do they perceive their ability to, deal with the risks? How do they perceive their own uncertainties? And then how do they perceive your firm as being able to stand up to this uncertainty and this risk? Having just spent 5 minutes talking about the importance of really being honest and getting the information, I would encourage you, if you're doing the client feedback by yourself or in your own firm, to rethink your questions to get at these kinds of issues, because clients are happy to tell you what their goals are. They're happy to tell you what the ideal relationship is like. But if you're not asking about these issues right now, you're passively, kind of communicating to clients that maybe we're not focused on the risk and the uncertainty, which is, of course, as we just spent the last 40 minutes talking about, where the bulk of the opportunity is in this marketplace today. So what I'd like to do is, Jen, I'm going to hand it over to you, and we'll talk about some of the tools that we're going to provide to everybody on the webinar on a complimentary basis to help you better understand your clients and win new work.
Excellent. Yeah, and we're very excited today to share these tools with you. These are some tools that BTI has been using with our own law firm clients, and what they're designed to do is help you get a better understanding of your client's business and how to talk to clients about the risks and the increasing complexity of the work that they're handling, which of course is, the fundamental theme of what Michael has been talking about today. So as we said, everyone on the call is going to get complimentary access to these tools, and I'll tell you about how to get access to them in just a moment. But first, I want to just talk through what is really going to be available to you. So the first tool that I want to tell you about is BTI's annual client meeting guide. Now, annual client meetings, these are meetings that you have with your clients, but they're outside the context of current work that you may be handling for them. So this isn't a meeting where you're updating them on the status of an active matter or talking about action steps that need to be accomplished. This meeting is more future looking. And to be clear, this is also different than, say, a client feedback interview. The purpose of the annual client meeting is not only to understand how the firm can improve its service, because that is a core component of these meetings, but more importantly, this is really an opportunity to have a back and forth conversation with your client to help them better plan and prepare for the year ahead. So in these meetings, the relationship partner, or if you have a client team set up for this client, they would be proactively sharing information with the client just as much as they're listening to the client talk about their business and the risks and issues that they see on the horizon. Now, we've created what is essentially going to be a downloadable guide to help you prepare and conduct a successful annual client meeting. And what you're going to find inside of this is a recommended agenda that you can use when you are hosting these meetings with your clients. We've included a number of key logistics and tips to keep in mind as you prepare for this meeting, because there is some prep work that needs to go into having a successful annual meeting. We've also included a number of core questions that we recommend you build into the conversation that you have with clients to make sure that you really are getting as much useful information out of them as possible. And then finally, we've also listed out the types of information that you should be ready to share during the annual client meeting, because as I said, this really is a back and forth conversation that you want to be having. This isn't a client listening exercise. So lots of great information in this guide. And again, after today's webinar, you're going to receive an email with a link to download your complimentary copy. And we welcome you to share that with your attorneys and your lawyers at your firm. Now, the next tool that we're going to be providing to everybody today is one that we have found to be particularly successful with law firms as they're looking to identify business development opportunities. And I'd venture to say, more importantly, what this tool has given our law firm clients the ability to do is build up attorney enthusiasm about following up on these opportunities, which I'm sure attorney enthusiasm for business development isn't an issue for anyone on today's call. But what this tool really is a link to an online survey, and I will stress that it's going to be a unique and customized link for your firm only, and you will be able to gain attorney input into what they are seeing as the top issues and risks that their clients will be facing over the next year. And what you'll be able to do is use the responses from this survey to identify any common client needs and essentially help you sort of get the most bang for the buck when you're thinking about business development opportunities. So, for example, if you send this out to your lawyers and a number of them return saying that regulatory compliance in a specific area is going to be a top need for their clients, well, now you know that you can focus on helping them maybe build out a compliance audit checklist that they can then proactively share with the clients. Now, how this really helps build the enthusiasm piece, because I know that's probably what everybody's a little skeptical about. By nature, first, attorneys are just more interested in initiatives where they feel like their voice has been heard, and so gathering their input sort of checks off that particular box. But also, you're going to be able to help jumpstart whatever tools they need to have these meaningful conversations with clients. What we have found through our research is most attorneys don't enjoy business development because they're usually not sure where to start the conversation. It always feels a little awkward, and this takes that obstacle out of the equation. So again, in the email that you received from BTI today, there's going to be a link for you to email us if you're interested in using this type of survey at your firm. And what you can expect is I'll reach out to you within the next day or two, and I will send you a customized link. We'll share some best practices for how to circulate this survey at your firm. We'll talk about how you gain access to the responses and how you can use those responses to win new work. And because I know that this is sensitive information, let me just sort of state the obvious. This information is solely going to be for your firm's own internal purposes, and it won't be shared or used elsewhere. And then finally, the last, and I think what might be my favorite tool that we're providing you with today is going to be a downloadable guide of client feedback metrics and questions for you to use in your own client feedback initiatives. So essentially, we're going to pull back the curtain on BTI's approach to client feedback, and we are inviting you to build these questions into your own client feedback programs. So the guide is going to walk you through why these metrics are important, how to ask clients these questions in a way that gets you meaningful responses, and how ultimately you can interpret the results. And any firm who uses these metrics in their client feedback program is welcome to contact BTI to gain access to our market benchmarks, because as I know many of you are aware, we've been tracking law firms' performance in these key metrics for the last 20 years. So whether you want to see how you perform against the national average, how you perform against best performers, or against competitors right in your client base, we'll be happy to pull together an analysis and discuss how you use your results to outperform other firms. Now, if you don't have an existing client feedback program in place, reach out. BTI would be happy to, set up a call, talk through how to get one up and running at your firm. I know Michael's talked about this before, but we work with law firms of all sizes, both large-scale client feedback initiatives, and that's where BTI would go out and interview your clients. We'd perform client-specific and firm-wide analyses. We'd give you actionable recommendations. But we also work with firms on how they can get smaller-scale feedback initiatives up and running using the firm's internal resources for the program. So either way, the piece that we want to stress and why we thought this was such an important tool to share with you all today is you have to get the client feedback, because that's the information that's going to help your firm improve the most. So we're super excited about that particular one. And as I said, we've used these tools with a number of our law firm clients already. And so, Michael, I thought it would be helpful if you could share just a few of the best practices on how firms have taken these tools and used them to win new work.
Sure. I think what they've done is, first of all, one of the things that's included in the surveys is asking a very specific question about how we deal as a firm with complexity. So the minute clients start to rank your performance, that gives you a real opportunity to go back and say, well, how do we do better? Or could you help me understand this? But, stepping back from that, one of the things we've found is, first, client discussions, which these, client feedback guides and tools will help you do. Set up task force with clients. We've seen law firms do this with multiple clients, and we've seen them do it with individual clients to pinpoint risks. Some strategic planning with larger legal departments. If your clients have more than 12 to 15 people, then you might want to think about some kind of strategic planning session to evaluate risk and where it's headed. Developing contingency plans for the smaller clients, because they're not really going to be ready to engage in strategic planning, but clearly they want to know what to do in the case of, something unexpected. I can't say enough, find ways to show your scale. No matter how big you are, make sure clients believe you can operate as a team. And then, finally, and Jen mentioned this before, craft tools and checklists to help your clients spot risk and manage vulnerability. Use the client survey that we're going to provide you to help spot those risks and the risks that your partners and attorneys think that your clients have, and use that as a starting point. And that'll get you some very good checklists very quickly. And, my recommendation would be to, figure out which one of these you can do in your firm, which ones you can do quickly, which ones make the most sense, but how do you position yourself to get the lucrative high work that's out there now and clients are thinking about so differently. And, that's kind of the question. Hopefully the tools we're providing you will help you with the answers. As we pointed out at the beginning of the webinar, we're taking questions a little bit differently. We got a lot of feedback that people didn't really like the chat feature because it took them away from the webinar. So we've set up a special email address, btiwebinars@bticonsulting.com. That's btiwebinars@bticonsulting.com. And please send us your questions, your comments. We'd be happy to answer your questions and discuss them. And, we very much appreciate you joining us this afternoon. We wish you the best of luck in the market. We think that it's a very exciting time. Opportunities like this don't come along very often. So, let's embrace it while it's here. And we look forward to your great success in using the tools. Thanks again so much for joining us.